So hello, welcome Renegade Inc, another talk show. Barry Ritholtz is here, a man who needs little introduction. You've won all sorts of awards for your punditry, your predictions, your stock picking. Where next for the global economy?
No idea.
Excellent. Fed September, what's going to happen?
I can't tell if it's September or December, but if you look at what the Fed actually has been saying, follow the data. The Fed has a dual mandate. Full employment, controlling inflation.
Yeah.
Right now we're at a point where you have to wonder why we're at emergency footing in terms of interest rates. So if we ignore all the Fed noise and all the chatter and just look at what they've told us, we're data dependent, we're looking at jobs data, we're looking at inflation data, it's hard to not see why the Fed wouldn't start normalizing rates, wouldn't start taking us off of this zero emergency footing. It's whether it's September or December doesn't matter. I think it's a fair guess, and it's only a guess because I don't know. But a quarter point a quarter for the next
Go on.
10 quarters.
Oh, really?
The joke that we've saying around the camp is they're going to raise rates 1 basis point a day for the next 4 years, and that'll normalize rates. But taking us off of zero, I don't care if you think the economy is fair to good. The economy could stand 25 or 50 basis point Fed funds rate.
I've asked a couple of people this, and it's about private debt. How much deleveraging has gone on actually since 2008?
Well, it depends on what you want to use for a data source. Anecdotally, we can tell you that there's lots and lots of indications that there have been some levels of deleveraging. We've seen it in the rise in home prices, which means that houses that were once under water are now zero equity. Hey, huge improvement. This house has no equity in it, better than having negative equity. So there's been some forms of deleveraging. There are signs that people have paid down a lot of debt. When you look at corporate America, it's really a dual story. On this hand is households and government, and on that side is corporations. Corporate America has never had a cleaner balance sheet with a lower debt servicing obligation and more cash on hand they do today. So the corporate side is really, really healthy. The household side, not as healthy, and the government side is the least healthy of all three.
So with that little concoction or that setup, where for the next president? Economy-wise, the next president comes in, whoever that is, what happens over the next 4 years in the U.S. economy?
Remember, the election is still more than a year ago. Taking a wild guess, I think that by the time we run around to the next election, the economy, which has been painfully slowly, very, very laboriously over the course of 5 years, slowly improved. The U.S. has all these pockets of really hot growth. You go to San Francisco, you go to Seattle, you go to New York or Boston or D.C., parts of the Midwest, Minnesota. There are areas that are doing really, really well. There are also lots of areas that are doing not so well. And so I've described this recovery as lumpy. It's not evenly distributed. There's hot areas and cold areas. But there's nothing on the immediate horizon that screams recession. Look, recessions come along fairly regularly. It's a regular cycle. There's nothing that screams recession is imminent. If we get a recession a couple of years from now, I don't know why people seem to think it's the end of the world. Recessions happen. They happen regularly. That said, we're not seeing any data that suggests in the U.S. a recession is likely to happen before the next election. So by the time the next president gets elected, they should be dealing with a fairly decent economy. Over the next 4 years, over that first term, wouldn't surprise me to see a recession, but again, recessions happen. It's not the end of the world.
There have been a huge amount of column inches dedicated to China and talking about the Chinese equity bump. What's your view?
Well, when you see the numbers that how much their equities have gained over the past few years, even today, so we're shooting this, it's August 2015, year over year, their market's still up 70, 80% over a 12-month basis. Year to date, not doing especially great, but you can draw a parallel to NASDAQ bubble in the 90s. Remember that unlike the United States, there's not a well-developed market structure, there's not a well-developed regulatory system, and there's really not a large institutional base. So you have a lot of mom and pops being encouraged to go out, borrow money, invest in the future of the company, of the country, and so you end up with a very bubblicious stock market. People have been calling for the China stock market bubble to pop for a long time. This is the year it's finally come true. I think the government is actually surprised that they can't control the market. This is something that frustrates them. Yeah. Hey, they have very effectively controlled the internet there, which a lot of people think is almost impossible. They're really very much surprised that the stock market there is beyond their control. Yeah. And those of us here will tell you attempts at market manipulation have gone on for as long as there's been a stock market. Margin rules and all the licensing requirements and the formation of the SEC and various things that the Federal Reserve has done. You know, people, they're like, oh, I can't believe they're manipulating the market. No, that's as long as there have been markets, there have been attempts to manipulate them. I think China is genuinely surprised that this is beyond their control. So they have to decide, are we going to be a communist regime, an essentially planned economy, or are we going to at least embrace? They've sort of faux embraced free market principles when it served their interest. But as soon as the market wobbled, they made Greenspan look like an amateur.
So that was exactly what I was going to come on to, because a little bird told me on the plane on the way over, you're a huge Alan Greenspan fan. Is that right?
Yeah, he's not talking to me lately. You know, I made a list of all the various causes of the financial crisis. And by the way, anytime anybody says, this caused the crisis, you can ignore that person.
Was Mr. Greenspan on your list?
Well, it's very complex and nuanced, and there are a lot of moving parts, but it's hard to avoid reaching the conclusion that he was not a significant component in a number of ways. First, he took rates significantly lower than they've ever been in a non-emergency situation. So rates were at below 2%, I want to say for almost 3 years, and at 1% for a year. In an environment that you just had the dot-coms pop and you had a mild recession. That didn't end September 11th. But none of those things, or all of them combined, called for ultra-low rates for extended period of time. He had a tendency to very much allow the traders in the stock market to manipulate him. They would throw a hissy fit, and he would get all, sorry, please forgive me, and give them a little love yeah. with a rate cut. But Greenspan not only kept rates low, put rates low and kept them too long, but when there was the opportunity to look at the abdication of traditional lending standards, when you had all these private non-bank lenders, since they're not a bank, the FDIC can't regulate them. The only one that's allowed to regulate them is the Federal Reserve. His answer was, they're innovators, we're not going to interfere. These were the sources of most of the subprime mortgages, which essentially were created in order to sell into the securitization process. And there's a great website called mortgage-implode.com that tracks the 400 or so mortgage lenders, mostly from California, that have blown up since the financial crisis.
An awful lot of that debt is still out there.
For sure. A lot of it's been written down. You had all these billion-dollar settlements with big banks. A lot of people walked away from mortgage. Look, we had, my guess was that we were going to have 10 million foreclosures. And I think
what did it come in at?
I want to say we topped out directly attributable to subprime and the crisis, not other stuff. Fine. I think we ended up somewhere between 6 and 8 million foreclosures. So we didn't hit my number. The HAMP program probably staved off 500,000 to 1 million, and there were foreclosures, and there were a handful of others. Plus, as a number of people have written, Jonathan Miller probably foremost, there are so many people who have either negative equity in their houses, low equity, or just no equity, that they're stuck there. They can't trade up. And so there's a huge shrinkage of inventory available for sale. It's not that the demand for housing is so robust across the country. It's that there's so little housing for sale because of that negative equity or zero equity problem that whatever's for sale ends up in a bidding war, and that's why prices have gone up as much as they have. It's a supply constraint, not a demand, an overwhelming amount of demand, which, but for that happening, we might have seen even more foreclosures. And zero, by the way, ultra-low mortgage rates, certainly helped a lot of banks that have a lot of bad mortgages on their books. One of the things I've said over and over again to people who have asked, why haven't we raised, well, the economy's getting better, why haven't we raised rates a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago? And the answer is zero is a bailout for the banks that are festooned with crappy mortgages. You keep this at zero and you prevent that many more mortgages from going belly up. If we would have taken rates to 2% 3 years ago, we would have been back rescuing the major money center banks.
The whole thing would have fallen over, wouldn't it?
I personally think, and I'm in the minority, but I think you absolutely would have had a huge number of problems at a number of banks. Whether it was manageable, I can't say, but there's so much bad debt still out there, I think it would have caused a real problem. And that's why in 2015, right? So what do we have? The unemployment rate went from 10% to 5.3%. Today we just crossed the 11 million jobs created since the end of the recession.
Only just.
Right? But still, 11 million jobs later, hey, you could normalize rates now. I'm not a crazy, the Fed must raise rates.
But is it underemployment or is it actual employment? Let's be
both.
honest.
Oh, no, it's both. You have 11 million real jobs. The nature of the economy has changed dramatically. You lost a lot of fairly high-paying jobs. They were replaced with a lot of, when people say Mick jobs, it's a little bit of an exaggeration. But, hospitality, food service, healthcare.
But we're ushering in the gig economy, are we not?
Maybe, to some degree. Look, the state of the economy is a never-ending set of changes. And technology, for a long time, has driven a constant pressure on the upside is productivity. The downside is, look, my office, we have 7 people. And to do what we do today with 7 people, to do that 20 years ago would have taken 40 people. So we're more productive, but that means it's harder for people to get high-paying jobs.
I really wanted to get back to the Greenspan stuff because I know you love him. But we're running out of time.
I give him credit. The nicest thing I could say.
Go on. Give him some.
I'll
throw
give
him a bone.
Credit. At least he was honest enough to admit that he was wrong.
When he was shocked, he wasn't half as shocked as the rest of the world, was he?
I found a flaw, and he said that was his quote. He said that to Congress. I give him credit for that. There's a run of people. I could give you a laundry list who still are in denial that they had a role in the crisis, still in denial that their ideology failed. Look,
is Ben Bernanke on that list?
There's 2 Ben Bernankes, right?
Is he on that list?
One of the Ben Bernankes is on that list.
You can't have it both ways.
I'll explain why. The first Ben Bernanke is the Fed governor who was a yes man for Greenspan, who talked about, it's all a global glut of money, which I still to this day don't believe. But he wasn't a key player. He was, the lady in waiting.
Right.
Once Ben Bernanke became Fed chair, and here's a guy who's a student of the Depression, as much as I intellectually disagreed with bailouts and a lot of things that the Fed did, ultimately, it's hard to argue against his position that the crisis would have been much deeper and much worse if I didn't do that. Now, my argument is, well, sure, it would have been a much worse V, but it would have come out of it faster, cleaner, better. The human nature...
You think he's delayed the inevitable?
I don't know. I don't know if that ultimately is going to happen. Look, we've watched for the past 20 years a series of sequential booms, busts, bubbles, and people forget that actions have consequences, some of which are unintended consequences. The Greenspan response to the bursting of the dot-coms and to some degree 9/11 basically created the spiral in oil, the spiral in inflation, the spiral in gold, the spiral in housing. Taking rates so low sent money managers chasing, I have to have yield, get me yield. Yeah. So along comes this junk, securitized subprime mortgages that the rating agencies, one of the major culprits in the financial crisis, stamped AAA, and these bond managers who have a 5% bogey, if you're running a foundation or charitable trust and you want to maintain your tax-deferred status, I got to pay out 5% a year. No one wants to go into principal. I got to get 5%. So, look at this. It's AAA and it's paying 5.25%.
Structurally determined, really.
Right, it's fantastic. Yeah. Someone should have said, wait, how is AAA paying 5.25% when the 10-year is paying 3%? And that's AAA.
But those voices were drowned out, right? I mean,
for the most part, the conversation that when you would ask that question, and I asked that question to a number of people, the answer was, sometimes it takes the market a while to figure this out. And that turned out to be right, just not in the way they expected.
Barry, I'm conscious that I'm keeping you from your lunch. And here at Camp Kotok,
I'm wasting away. You can see I got no reserves whatsoever.
Sum up this event in a tweet.
In a tweet? Oh, Lord.
Or a sentence.
It's I think this is my 10th year here.
You're a veteran.
I'm a veteran, and the first couple of years, it's a little overwhelming, like the names and the high profile. When I first started, no one had any clue who the hell I was. So it was kind of interesting. I remember one time we were playing poker, and two of us were playing. Two guys go to get wine for me and someone else, and I just remember turning to my guy sitting next to me playing poker and says, "Hey, my waiter manages $100 billion more than what your waiter does." It's that sort of space. It's really.
Did you tip him?
Whatever I could have tipped him would have been an insult to him. But it's a really interesting collection of people, a whole lot of diverse ideas, and it's a lot of fun. Look, I go to a lot of conferences all throughout the year. I speak at a lot of conferences. This is the most fun you're going to have with economists present anywhere.
In a canoe.
In a canoe. That's right.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been great having you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
That's it, Renegade Inc. talk show. We'll be back very soon.